with a deafening screech of metal against metal, leaving behind nothing but the acrid smell of coal smoke and a young woman clutching a torn envelope. 22-year-old Elena. Winters stood frozen on the wooden platform, her pale blue dress wrinkled from the long journey, watching the last car disappear around the bend. Inside that envelope was a letter that would change everything, and the realization that the man she'd traveled 800 miles to marry had vanished without a trace. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter for the third time, hoping somehow the words had changed. The handwriting was unmistakably Marcus Bellwood's, the same careful script that had filled dozens of love letters over the past year. But this message was different, cold and final. Elena, I cannot go through with our arrangement. By the time you read this, I will be gone. The money enclosed should cover your return journey. I am sorry. Be $15. That's what her future was worth to him. $15 and a one-way ticket back to a life that no longer existed. Elena pressed her hand to her stomach, where a tiny life grew Marcus's child, though he would never know it. She hadn't told him in her letters, wanting to share them news in person on their wedding day. Now that day would never come. The platform began to empty as families reunited and travelers headed into town. Elena remained motionless, watching the sun sink lower behind the Rocky Mountains. She had nowhere to go. Her parents had died in a factory fire 3 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and the promise of a new life with Marcus. Her few remaining relatives had made it clear she wasn't welcome, especially not as an unmarried woman expecting a child. A cool October breeze cut through her thin shawl, carrying the scent of pine and something else wood smoke from distant chimneys. The promise of warm homes and families gathering for supper. Elena's stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since dawn. The $15 in her hand suddenly felt both precious and inadequate. It might buy her a room and meals for a few days, but then what? Miss, are you all right? Elena turned to find a middle-aged woman in a brown traveling dress approaching her. The woman's face was kind but concerned, her gray hair neatly pinned beneath a simple hat. I'm fine, thank you, Elena managed, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. You've been standing here for nearly an hour now. The next train east doesn't come through until tomorrow morning. The woman studied Elena's face with sharp but gentle eyes. I'm Dorothy Hayes. My husband and I run the boarding house in town. You look like you could use a hot meal and a place to rest. Elena's pride warred with her desperation. She straightened her shoulders, trying to appear more confident than she felt. I appreciate your kindness, Mrs. Hayes, but I can manage. Dorothy's expression softened further. Child, I've been watching travelers come and go from this station for 23 years. I know the difference between someone waiting for a ride and someone who's got nowhere to go. Which are you? The simple question broke through Elena's carefully constructed facade. Her composure cracked and tears began to flow down her cheeks. I thought I was getting married today, she whispered. I traveled all the way from Pennsylvania. And he's gone. Dorothy stepped closer, her maternal instincts taking over. Oh, honey, what a terrible thing to do to someone. Come on now, let's get you somewhere warm. We can sort this out properly over some beef stew and fresh bread. Against her better judgment, Elena found herself following Dorothy down the dusty main street of Millbrook. The town was smaller than she'd expected, with wooden storefronts and dirt roads that would turn to mud with the first snow. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks already dusted white against the darkening sky. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, nothing like the rolling hills and factories of Pennsylvania. Hayes boarding house stood at the corner of Main and Pine, a 2-story building with a wide front porch and cheerful yellow paint. Dorothy led Elena through the front door into a warm parlor where the smell of cooking food made Elena's stomach clench with hunger. "Harold," Dorothy called toward the back of the house. "We've got a guest who needs our help." A tall, lanky man with graying hair and kind eyes emerged from what Elena assumed was the kitchen. He wore suspenders over a white shirt and had flour dusting his hands. "Well now, what have we here? This is—" Dorothy paused, realizing she didn't know Elena's name. "Elena Winters," Elena supplied quietly. Elena was supposed to be married today, but the scoundrel ran off and left her stranded at the station. Dorothy's tone suggested what she thought of men who abandoned their brides. Harold's expression grew serious. "That's a sorry thing indeed. You're welcome here, Miss Winters. No charge for tonight, Dorothy, and I believe in helping folks when they're down on their luck." Elena's eyes filled with tears again. "I can pay. I have some money." "Keep your money, child. You'll need it more than we do." Dorothy bustled around, gathering a bowl and spoon. "Now sit yourself down and tell us what happened while I get you some supper." Between bites of the most delicious beef stew she'd ever tasted, Elena found herself sharing her story. She told them about her parents' death, about the letters from Marcus, about traveling west with dreams of starting a new life. She didn't mention the baby. That secret felt too raw, too dangerous to share with strangers, no matter how kind. "Marcus Bellwood, you said?" Harold frowned. "Name doesn't ring a bell, and I know most folks around these parts. What did he tell you he did for work?" "He said he owned a ranch outside of town, raised cattle and horses." Elena pulled one of his old letters from her carpet bag. He described it in detail, a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, fields stretching to the mountains. Harold and Dorothy exchanged glances. "There's no ranch matching that description around Millbrook," Dorothy said gently. "And no Marcus Bellwood that we know of." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Not only had Marcus abandoned her, but he'd been lying from the beginning. There was no ranch, no white farmhouse, probably no Marcus Bellwood at all. She'd been corresponding with a phantom, building dreams on nothing but carefully crafted lies. "I'm such a fool," she whispered, pushing the bowl away despite her hunger. "You're not a fool," Harold said firmly. "You're a young woman who trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That's not foolishness. That's having a good heart in a world where some people take advantage of that." Elena spent that night in a small but clean room on the second floor, staring out the window at the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky. She'd never seen so many stars in Pennsylvania, where the factory smoke often obscured the night sky. Here, the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like spilled flour, beautiful and infinite and utterly indifferent to her troubles. She placed her hands on her still flat stomach, thinking about the life growing inside her. In a few months her condition would become obvious. What would she do then? How could she raise a child alone in a world that showed little mercy to unmarried mothers? The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost coating the windows and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from the kitchen. Elena dressed carefully, trying to decide what to do next. The eastbound train would arrive at 10 o'clock. She could return to Pennsylvania, though she had no idea where she'd go or how she'd survive. Or she could stay in Millbrook at least, temporarily, and try to figure out her next move. Downstairs, Dorothy was setting plates on a long dining table. "Morning, dear. Sleep well?" As well as could be expected. Elena managed a small smile. "Mrs. Hayes, I've been thinking. I don't have anywhere to go back east, and I wonder, might I stay here a bit longer? I could work to pay for my room, and board. I'm a good cook and cleaner, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Dorothy's face lit up. "Harold and I were just talking about needing help around here. We're getting too old to manage everything ourselves, and the boarding house stays plenty busy with folks passing through. If you're serious about staying, we'd be glad to have you." Relief flooded through Elena. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would give her time to think, to plan, to figure out how to build a life from the ashes of her dreams. The morning train came and went without her. Elena stood on the porch of the boarding house, watching it disappear toward the east, carrying away her last easy option for escape. Whatever happened next, she was committed to facing it here in Millbrook, Colorado, surrounded by mountains. That seemed to touch the sky. Over the following days, Elena threw herself into work at the boarding house. She helped Dorothy with cooking and cleaning, learned to manage the books, and greeted the steady stream of travelers who passed through town. The work was hard but satisfying, and she found comfort in the routine. Dorothy and Harold treated her like family, never prying into her past or making her feel like a burden. But Elena knew she couldn't hide her condition forever. By her calculations, she was nearly 3 months along. Soon her body would betray her secret, and then what? Would the Hays still want her around when they learned the truth? Would the respectable citizens of Millbrook accept an unmarried pregnant woman in their midst? 2 weeks after her arrival, Elena was hanging laundry on the line behind the boarding house when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked up to see a rider coming down the back alley, a tall man on a beautiful chestnut mare, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. The man was unlike anyone she'd seen in town. Where most of the local men were soft around the middle. From sedentary work, this one was lean and strong, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that spoke of physical labor. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, and several days' worth of stubble covered his jaw. He wore working clothes-worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days. As he drew closer, Elena could see his eyes deep brown, almost black, with lines around them that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. There was something about his face that made her feel oddly safe, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way he sat his horse with easy confidence, or the gentle way he spoke to the animals. The rider noticed her watching and touched the brim of his hat politely. "Afternoon, miss." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Good afternoon," Elena replied, suddenly conscious of her faded work dress and the wisps of hair that had escaped her bun. "I'm looking for the Hays boarding house. Got some supplies to deliver. This is it. Mr. and Mrs. Hays are inside." Elena gestured toward the back door. "I'll get them for you." "Much obliged." The man swung down from his horse with fluid grace, moving like someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "I'm Jake Morrison, by the way. I run a ranch about 10 miles south of here." Elena's heart skipped. After Marcus's deception, the word ranch filled her with suspicion and dread. "Elena Winters. I help Hays with the boarding house." Something in her tone must have changed, because Jake's expression grew more careful. "Everything all right, miss?" "Winters?" Before Elena could answer, Harold emerged from the back door, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Jake, good to see you. Got those supplies I ordered?" "Everything on your list and then some." Jake began untying bundles from the pack horse. "Coffee, sugar, flour, and some jerky my cook made. She said to tell Dorothy it's the spiced kind she likes." Elena watched the easy interaction between the two men, noting how Harold's face lit up when he saw Jake. Whatever else this rancher might be, he was clearly well regarded by Hays. "Elena, this is Jake Morrison," Harold said, noticing her hovering nearby. "He's got one of the finest cattle operations in the territory." "Jake, this is Elena. She's been helping us out around here." Jake nodded respectfully. "Pleasure to meet you properly, Miss Winters." There was something in his voice, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Elena found herself studying his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. But his dark eyes were direct and honest, without the calculating look she now realized had always lurked in Marcus's letters. "Jake, why don't you stay for supper?" Harold suggested. Dorothy's making her famous pot roast, and it's been too long since we had a proper visit. I appreciate the offer, but I should get back. Got cattle to check on, and there's weather coming." Jake glanced at the western sky, where clouds were beginning to build behind the mountains. Elena followed his gaze and saw what he meant: dark, heavy clouds that spoke of the first real storm of the season. The temperature had been dropping all day, and now the wind carried the sharp bite of coming snow. "At least come in for coffee before you head out," Dorothy called from the doorway, having heard the conversation. "You can't ride 10 miles in this weather without something hot in your belly." Jake seemed to consider this, his eyes moving between the threatening sky and Dorothy's concerned face. "I suppose I could spare a few minutes." They gathered in the boarding house's warm kitchen, where Dorothy poured coffee from a pot that seemed to always be brewing. Elena found herself stealing glances at Jake as he spoke with Harold about cattle prices and weather patterns. He had an easy way about him, comfortable with silence but engaged when he spoke. There was none of the nervous energy or forced charm she remembered from the few men she'd known back east. "How long have you been ranching out here?" Elena asked, surprising herself by joining the conversation. "About 8 years now. Came out from Missouri after the war ended." Jake's expression grew more serious. Figured the country could use some building up instead of tearing down. There was something in the way he said it that suggested deeper wounds, stories Elena sensed she had no right to ask about. Instead, she poured him more coffee and listened as he and Harold discussed the coming winter. "This storm's going to be a bad one," Jake said, studying the darkening sky through the kitchen window. "First big snow always catches folks off guard." "You got enough firewood laid in?" "Should have plenty," Harold replied, "though I worry about some of the older folks in town. Mrs. Peterson's been trying to split her own wood since her husband passed." "I'll send one of my hands over tomorrow with a load," Jake said without hesitation. "No charge. We've got more than we need, and she shouldn't be swinging an axe at her age." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of genuine kindness that had nothing to do with what someone might gain in return. This was so different from Marcus's calculated charm, designed to lure her west for his own purposes. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and sending leaves skittering across the back porch. Jake stood, reaching for his hat. "I better head out while I can still see the trail." "Be careful out there," Dorothy said, genuine worry in her voice. "That sky looks mean." Jake paused at the door, his eyes finding Elena's. "Miss Winters, it was a pleasure meeting you. I hope you're settling in well here in Millbrook." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Safe travels." After he left, Elena helped Dorothy clean up the coffee cups, her mind churning with questions she couldn't voice. There had been something different about Jake Morrison, a steadiness that was both attractive and terrifying. She'd trusted once before and been devastated. Could she ever trust again? That night, the storm Jake had predicted arrived with a vengeance. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, driven by winds that howled around the corners of the boarding house. Elena lay in her small room, listening to the storm and thinking about the rancher who'd ridden away into the gathering darkness. She wondered if he'd made it home safely, then chided herself for caring about a man she'd just met. But as she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of dark eyes and calloused hands, and the way Jake Morrison had looked at her, not with calculation or desire, but with simple, honest interest. It was a dangerous thing to hope for, but Elena couldn't quite stop herself from wondering what it might be like to be seen that way by someone who meant it. The blizzard raged for 3 days, turning Millbrook into a white wilderness where familiar landmarks disappeared beneath shifting drifts. Elena spent those days working alongside Dorothy, cooking for stranded travelers and keeping the fires burning while Harold ventured out periodically to check on neighbors. The boarding house became a refuge for anyone caught in town by the storm, and Elena found purpose in the constant activity, On the fourth morning, she woke to an unusual silence. The wind had finally stopped. Elena pressed her face to the frost-covered window and saw a world-transformed snow piled higher than fence posts, icicles hanging like crystal daggers from the eaves, and a sun so bright on the white landscape. It hurt to look at directly. "Mercy," Dorothy breathed, joining her at the window. "I haven't seen snow like this since the winter of '69. Folks are going to need help digging out." Elena was already reaching for her shawl. "I'll help however I can." The next few hours blurred together in a symphony of shoveling, hauling firewood, and checking on elderly residents who lived alone. Elena discovered muscles she didn't know. She had as she helped clear pathways and deliver supplies to those who couldn't leave their homes. The physical work felt good. It kept her mind occupied and made her feel useful in a way she hadn't experienced since her parents died. She was carrying a basket of hot soup to Mrs. Peterson when she heard the familiar sound of horses struggling through deep snow. A group of riders was making their way down Main Street, their mounts breathing hard from the effort of navigating the drifts. Leading them was Jake Morrison, his dark hair white with snow and his face red from the cold. Spotted Elena and guided his horse toward her, the animal's hooves crunching through the crusted snow. "Miss Winters, good to see you made it through the storm safely, Mr. Morrison." Elena felt her cheeks warm despite the frigid air. "We were worried about you when the storm hit so quickly." Jake swung down from his horse, his boots sinking nearly to his knees in the snow. "Lost some cattle in the high pastures, but we managed to bring most of the herd down to shelter before it got too bad." He gestured toward his companions, 3 men Elena didn't recognize, all looking tired but determined. "We're checking on folks in town now." "That's very kind of you." Elena shifted the basket to her other arm. "I'm taking soup to Mrs. Peterson. Harold was worried about her." "Mind if I come along?" I promised Harold I'd make sure she had enough firewood, and my boys can start splitting logs while we check on her. Elena nodded, and they made their way through the snow-clogged streets together. Jake walked beside her, occasionally offering his arm when the drifts were particularly deep. Elena found herself acutely aware of his presence, the way he moved. With sure-footed confidence, even in treacherous conditions, the careful way he helped her navigate obstacles without making her feel helpless. Mrs. Peterson answered her door with tears of relief when she saw them. The elderly woman's house was cold, her fire reduced to glowing embers, and she admitted she'd been too frightened to venture outside for more wood. "Well, we'll fix that right up," Jake said, already heading back outside. Elena heard him speaking to his men, and within minutes the sound of axes rang through the crisp air. While Jake's crew worked on splitting wood, Elena helped Mrs. Peterson warm the soup and tend her fire. The older woman chattered nervously, clearly overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. "That Jake Morrison is a good man," she said, watching through the window as he stacked wood with practiced efficiency. "When my husband died last spring, Jake came by every few weeks to check on things. Never asked for anything in return, never made me feel like charity. Just neighborly." Elena watched Jake work, noting the easy way he interacted with his men, respectful but clearly in charge, working just as hard as they were despite being the boss. It was another point in his favor, though Elena tried to remind herself that she barely knew this man. "Has he always been alone?" Elena asked, then immediately regretted the question. It sounded too much like she was fishing for information. Mrs. Peterson's expression grew sad. "Lost his wife about 5 years ago. Childbirth fever. They'd only been married 2 years, poor souls. He hasn't looked at another woman since, far as anyone knows. Just throws himself into that ranch if his work can fill the hole she left behind." Elena's heart clenched with unexpected sympathy. She understood loss, understood the way grief could hollow you out and leave you wondering how to keep breathing. But she also understood now why Jake had seemed different from other men. He'd loved deeply and lost everything. It explained the shadows she sometimes saw in his dark eyes, when the wood was stacked and Mrs. Peterson's fire was blazing merrily. Jake returned to collect Elena. His cheeks were red from exertion and cold, and Elena found herself wanting to reach up and touch his face, to warm those cold-bitten features with her hands. The impulse was so strong and so unexpected that she took a step backward, alarmed by her own reaction. "Everything all right?" Jake asked, noticing her sudden movement. "Of course, just grateful for your help with Mrs. Peterson. She was really struggling." Jake's expression softened. "That's what neighbors do, look out for each other." He paused, studying Glenna's face. "You've been doing your share too, from what I hear. Dorothy told me you've been helping folks all over town since the storm ended." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm just trying to be useful. Hayes have been so kind to me, and this community has welcomed me. It feels good to give something back." They walked back toward the boarding house together, Jake leading his horse through the deep snow. The afternoon sun was already beginning to sink toward the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. "Miss Winters," Jake said suddenly, then stopped walking. "Elena, would you? That is, I was wondering if you might like to see the ranch sometime. When the roads clear up, of course. Dorothy mentioned you came out from the back east, and I thought you might enjoy seeing how we do things out here." Elena's breath caught. The invitation was clearly more than casual neighborliness, and she found herself torn between longing and terror. Part of her wanted nothing more than to say yes, to spend time with this steady, kind man who looked at her like she mattered. But another part of her whispered warnings. She was pregnant, alone, carrying secrets that could destroy any chance at happiness. That's very kind of you, Mr. Morrison. I'd like that, when the weather permits." Jake's smile was like sunrise, breaking over the mountains, slow, warm, and transformative. "Good, that's good. I'll talk to Dorothy about arranging something proper." That evening, Elena sat in her small room brushing her hair before the mirror and thinking about Jake's invitation. Her reflection showed a young woman with worry lines around her eyes and shadows beneath them from sleepless nights. But there was something else there too, a spark of hope she hadn't seen since before. Marcus's betrayal. She placed her hands on her stomach, which was beginning to show the slightest curve. In another month, maybe 2, her condition would become obvious. Should she tell Jake the truth before accepting his invitation? Should she tell Dorothy and Harold, who had shown her such kindness? The question plagued her through the following weeks as Millbrook slowly dug out from the blizzard. Jake came to town several times, always finding reasons to stop by the boarding house. Sometimes he brought supplies for Harold. Sometimes he joined them for meals. And once he arrived with a beautiful wooden rocking chair he'd made during the long storm nights. "For the boarding house parlor," he explained to Dorothy, but his eyes were on Elena as he spoke. "Thought your guests might appreciate having a comfortable place to sit by the fire." Elena ran her fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship. The chair was beautiful, made with obvious skill and care, every joint perfect, every curve graceful. "You made this yourself?" "During the storm. Had to do something with my hands while the wind howled." Jake seemed almost embarrassed by her admiration. "My father was a carpenter back in Missouri. Taught me to work with wood before I learned about cattle." "It's beautiful," Elena said softly, and meant it. The chair represented hours of patient work, skill passed down from father to son, time spent creating something useful and lovely. It was so different from the empty promises and false charm Marcus had offered. As winter deepened, Elena found herself looking forward to Jake's visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. He was unfailingly polite, never presumptuous, but she could feel something building between them, a connection that grew stronger each time they spoke. He told her about his ranch, describing the cattle and horses, the vast pastures that stretched toward the mountains, the house he'd built with his own hands. She told him about Pennsylvania, about her parents and the life she'd left behind. carefully editing out the parts that would reveal too much. "Do you miss it?" Jake asked one evening as they sat in the boarding house parlor. "The East, I mean. The cities and all the people?" Elena considered the question seriously. "I miss my parents terribly, but the rest of it? No, I don't think I do. It's quieter here, more peaceful. People seem to have time for each other in a way they didn't back home." "It can be lonely too," Jake said quietly. "Especially in winter, when you're snowed in for days at a time with nothing but your own thoughts for company." There was something in his voice that made Elena look at him more closely. In the firelight, his face showed the wear of someone who'd carried burdens alone for too long. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but she held back. What comfort could she offer when she was keeping such a fundamental secret from him? "Mr. Morrison, Jake," she said carefully. "I hope you don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but you don't have to be alone. You're a good man. Any woman would be fortunate to have your attention." Jake's dark eyes met hers across the small space between their chairs. "Not any woman," he said quietly. "Just one." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning Elena wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized what he was telling her, what he was asking without asking. Before she could respond, Dorothy bustled into the parlor with a tray of coffee and cake. "Thought you two might like some refreshments," she said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the charged atmosphere she'd interrupted. The moment passed, but Elena felt its weight settling over her like a warm blanket and a heavy stone all at once. Jake Morrison was falling in love with her. And God help her, she was falling in love with him too. That night, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling and wrestling with impossible choices. Her body was changing daily now. Her dresses were getting snug around the waist, and she'd had to let out seams more than once. Soon there would be no hiding her condition. What would happen then? Would Jake's feelings survive the revelation that she was carrying another man's child? Would the Hayes still welcome her in their home? Would the town that had embraced her turn cold and judgmental? The next morning brought news that changed everything. Elena was helping Dorothy prepare breakfast when Harold burst through the kitchen door, his face grim with worry. "Bad news from Jameson Place," he announced. "Their youngest boy took sick in the night. High fever, trouble breathing. Dorothy, they're asking if you can come help. You've got the best nursing skills in town." Dorothy was already untying her apron. "Of course I'll go. Elena, can you manage things here? We've only got 2 guests, and they're easy enough to feed." "Certainly," Elena replied, though her stomach churned with anxiety. The Jameson boy was only 6 years old, and illness could turn deadly quickly in children. She'd seen it happen too many times back east. Dorothy gathered her medical supplies, herbs, tinctures, and remedies she'd learned from her own mother. "I may be gone several days if the boy is as sick as Harold says. Can you handle the boarding house on your own?" "I'll be fine," Elena assured her, though she wasn't entirely certain. Managing the boarding house alone would be a challenge, but she was determined to prove herself capable. As Dorothy and Harold prepared to leave for the Jameson ranch, Elena felt a familiar flutter in her stomach, not anxiety this time, but something else. She placed her hand over her belly and felt it again. Stronger now, movement. The baby was moving. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This was real. The life growing inside her was real, becoming more real every day. Soon she wouldn't be able to hide it, wouldn't be able to pretend this pregnancy was something that might go away if she ignored it long enough. Standing in the boarding house kitchen, watching Dorothy gather supplies to help a sick child, Elena made a decision that terrified and liberated her in equal measure. She couldn't keep living with this secret. She couldn't let Jake's feelings deepen while she hid such a fundamental truth from him. And she couldn't continue to accept the Hayes' kindness without them knowing what they were really offering shelter to. It was time to tell the truth. Number matter what the consequences might be. Elena's hands shook as she prepared breakfast for the boarding house guests, her mind reeling from the decision she'd made. The baby's movement had been like a wake-up call, a reminder that time was running out for half-truths and careful omissions. She had perhaps a month before her condition became obvious to everyone, and she refused to let Jake discover her secret through gossip or observation. The guests, a traveling salesman and an older woman visiting her sister, ate their eggs and bacon without comment, unaware of the turmoil in their hostess. Elena managed polite conversation, but her thoughts kept drifting to how she would find the courage to speak the words that might destroy everything she was beginning to hope for. By mid-morning, both guests had departed on their respective journeys, leaving Elena alone in the boarding house for the first time since her arrival. The silence felt overwhelming after weeks of constant activity. She wandered through the empty rooms, straightening furniture that didn't need straightening, dusting surfaces that were already cleaned out. Around noon, she heard horses approaching and looked out to see Jake riding up the front path, alone this time. Her heart hammered as she watched him dismount and tie his horse to the hitching post. This was her chance, perhaps the only chance she'd have to tell him privately, without the haze present to witness whatever happened next. Jake knocked softly on the front door, his hat in his hands when Elena opened it. "Afternoon, Elena. I heard Dorothy and Harold went to help with the Jameson boy. Thought I'd check and see if you needed anything." "That's very thoughtful." Elena stepped back to let him enter, acutely aware that they were alone together for the first time. "I'm managing fine, though I'll admit it's strange being here by myself." Jake hung his hat on the hall tree and followed her into the parlor. "Any word on how the boy's doing?" "None yet. Harold said they might be gone in several days." Elena perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Jake, there's something I need to tell you, something important." "Something?" In her tone made Jake's expression grow serious. He settled into the chair across from her, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" Elena had rehearsed this conversation in her mind dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, all her carefully planned words deserted her. She stared at her hands, gathering courage. "I haven't been entirely honest with you." "About why?" "I came to Colorado about my situation." She forced herself to look up, to meet his dark eyes. "The man who was supposed to marry me, Marcus Bellwood... He didn't just abandon me. I'm carrying his child." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Jake's expression didn't change immediately, but Elena saw something shift behind his eyes: surprise, calculation, perhaps disappointment. The silence stretched until Elena thought she might scream from the tension. "How far along?" Jake asked. Quietly. 4 months, nearly 5. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't tell him before I traveled out here. I wanted to surprise him on our wedding day." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose the surprise was on me." Jake leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Elena watched his face, trying to read his thoughts, but his expression had become carefully neutral. "Does anyone else know?" "No, the Hayes have been wonderful to me, but they don't." "No, no one knows except you now." Elena's composure began to crack. "I know what this means. I know what people will think of me, what they'll call me. I know I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid. I didn't want to lose... What didn't you want to lose?" Jake's voice was gentle but probing. Elena met his eyes again, and the words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Your friendship, your respect, the way you look at me like I'm worth something. I've never had anyone look at me the way you do, and I couldn't bear the thought of watching that change to judgment or pity." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his words were what Lana had expected. "The baby's father. This is Marcus. Do you love him?" The question caught Elena off guard. I thought I did. But I realized now I was in love with the idea of him, with the life he promised me. The man I loved didn't really exist. He was just words on paper, lies designed to lure me west for reasons I'll never understand. And now, if he came back tomorrow, would he want to marry you and give the baby his name? Elena didn't have to think about her answer. I wouldn't have him. Even if it meant keeping my reputation intact, I wouldn't tie myself to a man who could abandon someone the way he abandoned me. My child deserves better than a father who runs when things get difficult. Jake nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd been wondering about. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains, while Elena waited in an agony of suspense. I lost a baby once, he said suddenly, his back still turned to her. Mary was 6 months along when she started having pains. The doctor said sometimes these things just happen, that there was nothing we could have done. But she blamed herself. And I blamed myself, and maybe we both blamed God. She died trying to give me another child, trying to replace what we'd lost. Elena's heart broke for him. Jake, I'm so sorry. He turned back to face her, and Elena saw tears in his dark eyes. The point is, I know what it's like to want a child desperately, to lose that chance, to live with an empty house and empty arms. So when I look at you, knowing you're carrying a baby that another man threw away, it doesn't make me think less of you, Elena. It makes me angry at him for not knowing what he had. Elena stared at Jake in shock. This wasn't remotely close to any reaction she'd imagined. You're not disgusted? Disappointed? Jake crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his calloused ones. I'm honored that you trusted me with the truth. I'm furious at the man who hurt you. And I'm grateful that his cowardice brought you here, to Millbrook, to me. Elena began to cry, then great, gulping sobs of relief and gratitude, and overwhelming emotion. Jake gathered her into his arms, holding her while she wept against his chest, his hand stroking her hair. It's all right, he murmured. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this by yourself. When Elena's tears finally subsided, she pulled back to look at Jake's face. What happens now? I'll be showing soon, and then everyone will know. The talk will start, and it won't be kind. Jake's jaw tightened. Let them talk. Anyone who has something to say about it can answer to me. As for what happens now. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I'd like to court you properly. If you'll have me. I'd like to ask your permission to speak to Harold about my intentions when he returns. Elena's breath caught. Jake, you can't mean that. I'm pregnant with another man's child. I'm not the kind of woman men marry. I'm the kind they. You're the kind of woman I want to marry, Jake interrupted firmly. The kind I want to build a life with, raise children with. Your baby will need a father, and you'll need a husband. More than that, I need you. I've been half alive since Mary died. Just going through the motions. But when I'm with you, I feel like myself again. Elena searched his face for any sign of doubt or pity, but found only sincerity and determination. Are you sure? Really sure? Because once you tie yourself to me, there's no taking it back. The whole territory will know you married a woman who was pregnant when you met her. Good, Jake said firmly. Then everyone will know I was smart enough to recognize a treasure when I found one, even if some fool was too blind to see what he had. Elena felt a smile tugging at her lips for the first time in months. You're either the kindest man alive or completely insane. Maybe a little of both. Jake's own smile was soft and warm. Is that a yes? Elena studied his face, the weathered features, the steady dark eyes, the mouth that spoke only truth. This man was offering her everything she'd dreamed of and thought she'd lost forever. Not just marriage, but love. Not just a father for her child, but a real family. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Jake's kiss was gentle and sweet. full of promise rather than passion. When they broke apart, Elena felt like a different person than she'd been an hour ago, no longer a woman carrying shame and secrets, but someone loved and wanted and cherished. "There's something else we need to discuss," Jake said, his tone becoming more practical. "The ranch, it's a good property, but it's isolated. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and town is 10 miles of rough road. It can be lonely, especially in winter. Are you prepared for that kind of life?" Elena thought about the cramped apartment she'd shared with her parents in Pennsylvania, the noise and smoke and constant press of people. "I think I might like the quiet, and I won't be alone, I'll have you. And the baby. And whoever else comes along," Jake added with a grin that made Elena's cheeks warm. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning their future, when they would marry, where they would live, how they would manage the transition from Elena's life at the boarding house to life as a rancher's wife. Jake described his property in detail. The 2-story house with its wide front porch and mountain views, the barn and outbuildings, the creek that ran through the property, providing fresh water year-round. "It's not fancy," he warned. "I built it with my own hands, and I was more concerned with sturdy than pretty." "It sounds perfect," Elena said, and meant it. After months of uncertainty, the idea of a real home felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. As evening approached, Jake reluctantly prepared to leave. "I don't like the idea of you being here alone tonight," he said, reaching for his hat. "I'll be fine. I've got the doors locked, and Mrs. Chen next door knows to listen for any trouble." Jake paused at the door. "Elena, about telling folks. I think we should wait until Harold and Dorothy return. They've been like family to you, and they deserve to hear our news from us, not from gossip." Elena nodded. "What about my condition? Should we tell them everything?" "That's your decision. But if you want my opinion, I think they care enough about you to handle the truth. They might surprise you." After Jake left, Elena sat in the parlor where just hours earlier she'd been terrified to speak her secret aloud. Now that same room felt full of possibility and hope. She placed her hands on her growing belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palms. "Everything's going to be all right," she whispered to her unborn child. "We're going to have a real family, a real home. Jake Morrison is going to be your daddy, and he's going to love you just as much as if you were his own blood." The baby kicked as if in response, and Elena laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had since receiving Marcus's cruel letter. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she could simply be happy. She was loved, wanted, safe. Her child would have a name and a father and a future. 3 days later, Harold and Dorothy returned from the Jameson Ranch with good news. The boy's fever had broken, and he was on the mend. Elena greeted them with barely contained excitement, having spent the intervening days alternating between joy and nervous anticipation. "You look different," Dorothy observed, studying Elena's face over supper. "There's color in your cheeks, and you're practically glowing. What happened while we were gone?" Elena exchanged glances with Jake, who had arrived shortly after Hayes returned. They'd agreed he should be present when she shared her news. "There's something I need to tell you both," Elena began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "About my situation and about my future." Harold and Dorothy listened in silence as Elena told them everything about the pregnancy, about Marcus's abandonment, about Jake's proposal and her acceptance. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Finally, Dorothy reached across the table and took Elena's hands. "Oh, honey, you've been carrying this burden all alone, haven't you? No wonder you've looked so worried sometimes. You're not angry? Disappointed?" "Angry at that scoundrel who abandoned you, yes," Harold said firmly. "But disappointed in you? Never. You're a good woman who trusted the wrong man. That's not a sin, it's just misfortune." Dorothy squeezed Elena's hands. "And Jake Morrison asking, To marry you. Well, that's the best news I've heard in months. You'll be happy together. Elena felt tears of relief prick her eyes. Thank you. Both of you. For everything you've done for me, for accepting me when I had nowhere to go. You're family now, Dorothy said simply. And this baby will be our grandchild, blood or no blood. That's how it works when people choose to love each other. Jake cleared his throat. Harold, I'd like to speak with you privately, if you don't mind, about my intentions toward Elena. Harold's weathered face broke into a grin. I reckon I know what your intentions are, son. But yes, let's make it official. As the two men headed for Harold's study, Dorothy turned to Elena with tears in her eyes. I'm so happy for you, dear. Jake's a good man, and he'll take care of you and that baby like they were the most precious things on earth. Elena nodded, her own eyes wet. I know. I'm still afraid sometimes, afraid this is all too good to be true. Love always feels too good to be true when you first find it. Dorothy said wisely. But Jake Morrison doesn't make promises he can't keep. If he says he wants to marry you, then you can count on it happening. Through the study door, Elena could hear the low murmur of masculine voices, Jake asking formal permission to marry. Her, Harold giving his blessing. It was old-fashioned and proper, and it made Elena feel cherished in a way she'd never experienced. When the men returned, Harold was beaming. Well, looks like we're going to have a wedding to plan. Jake wants to marry you as soon as possible, says. He doesn't want to wait around and give you time to change your mind. Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I'm not going to change my mind. Jake moved to stand behind her chair, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. Good, because I've already talked to Reverend Matthews about performing the ceremony next Sunday after morning service. If that's agreeable to you, next Sunday. In 5 days, she would be Mrs. Jake Morrison, with a home and a husband and a future for her child. It seemed impossible that her life could change so completely, so quickly. It's perfect, Elena said, reaching up to cover one of Jake's hands with hers. Absolutely perfect. The news of Elena and Jake's engagement spread through Millbrook like wildfire. By Thursday morning, 3 days before the wedding, it seemed every person in town had an opinion about the union. Elena discovered this when she ventured to Miller's General Store to purchase fabric for a wedding dress, accompanied by Dorothy, who had insisted on helping with the preparations. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and Elena immediately noticed how conversation stopped mid-sentence. Mrs. Miller, the store owner's wife, looked up from arranging ribbons with an expression that could have curdled milk. Well, well, Mrs. Miller said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. If it isn't our blushing bride-to-be. Moving rather quickly, aren't we, dear? You've only been in town a couple of months. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Dorothy stepped forward before she could respond. When two people find love, there's no point in waiting around, Dorothy said firmly. Jake and Elena are perfect for each other. Mrs. Miller's smile became even more brittle. Oh, I'm sure they are. Though I must say, it's quite romantic how Jake Morrison suddenly decided to settle down after all these years of being a confirmed bachelor. What changed his mind, I wonder? The implication was clear, and Elena felt her stomach twist with anxiety. Had people already begun to suspect her condition? Her dress still hid her growing belly, but perhaps she wasn't being as careful as she thought. Perhaps he simply met the right woman, Elena said quietly, forcing herself to meet Mrs. Miller's calculating gaze. Perhaps. Mrs. Miller's eyes swept over Elena's figure with uncomfortable intensity. Well, what can I help you ladies find today? Elena selected a bolt of cream-colored silk that would work beautifully for a simple wedding dress, trying to ignore the whispered conversations happening around them. She could feel eyes following her movements, cataloging every detail of her appearance and behavior. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Miller called out sweetly, Do give Jake my congratulations, dear. And tell him if he ever needs anything advice about marriage, perhaps he knows where to find me." Outside the store, Elena felt like she could finally breathe again. "That was horrible," she murmured to Dorothy. "Mildred Miller has been jealous of every happy woman in this town since her own husband ran off with a saloon girl 15 years ago." Dorothy said dismissively, "Don't pay her any mind. She's just bitter because Jake Morrison never looked twice at her when she was setting her cap for him after Mary died." Elena absorbed this information with growing unease. How many people are going to react like that? Some will, some won't. The people who matter, the ones whose opinions are worth anything, they're happy for you both. Mrs. Peterson has been knitting baby blankets ever since she heard the news, though she thinks it's for after you're married. Elena stopped walking. "She's making baby blankets?" Dorothy's cheeks flushed. "Well, naturally people assume newlyweds will want to start a family right away. And Jake's made no secret of wanting children." The reality of her situation hit Elena like a physical blow. People would be watching, counting months, whispering about premature babies and shotgun weddings. Even if Jake was willing to face the gossip, she wasn't sure she was strong enough to endure it. That evening, Jake arrived at the boarding house to find Elena unusually quiet during supper. After Harold and Dorothy retired for the evening, he asked her to walk with him on the front porch despite the cold air. "Something's bothering you," he observed, wrapping his coat around her shoulders as they settled on the porch swing. "What happened today?" Elena told him about the encounter at Miller's store, about the calculating looks and barely veiled comments. "Jake, I'm afraid I've made a terrible mistake. People are already suspicious, and once we're married, they'll be counting months until the baby arrives. Everyone will know, double quotes, let them know," Jake said firmly. "Do you think I care what Mildred Miller or anyone else thinks about our marriage? But your reputation, my reputation will survive. Will yours? That's what matters to me." Elena leaned against his solid warmth, drawing comfort from his presence. "I never thought about how this would affect you. People might think you're marrying me out of pity, or that I trapped you somehow." Jake turned her face toward his dark eyes serious in the moonlight. "Elena, listen to me carefully. I don't care if the whole territory thinks I'm a fool. I don't care if they whisper about us for the next 20 years. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. Do you want to marry me?" "Yes, but then everything else is just noise." Jake kissed her forehead gently. "Besides, once they see how happy we are together, the talk will die down. People always find something new to gossip about eventually." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the boarding house. Elena was hemming her wedding dress in the parlor when she heard unfamiliar voices in the kitchen. Through the open doorway, she could see a well-dressed woman speaking with Dorothy in urgent, hushed tones. Simply cannot allow this to happen," the woman was saying. "That poor man has no idea what he's getting himself into." Elena's blood turned to ice as she recognized the voice of Mrs. Abernathy, the wife of Millbrook's bank president and the unofficial leader of the town's social elite. Dorothy's response was too quiet to hear, but her tone suggested she was not pleased with her visitor. "I'm not trying to be cruel," Mrs. Abernathy continued, her voice carrying clearly now. "But Jake Morrison is a respected member of this community. He deserves to know the truth about that woman before he makes a terrible mistake." Elena stood, frozen, her sewing forgotten in her lap. What truth was Mrs. Abernathy referring to? Had someone discovered her pregnancy, or was this just malicious speculation? "I think you should leave," Dorothy said firmly, her voice loud enough for Elena to hear clearly. "Jake Morrison is a grown man capable of making his own decisions about his personal life. But surely I can see that you're gossiping about matters that are none of your business." Dorothy interrupted. "Now, I believe I asked you to leave." Elena heard the kitchen door slam. followed by Dorothy's heavy footsteps approaching. The parlor. Dorothy appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with anger. "That meddling busybody," Dorothy muttered, "acting like she's the moral authority of the entire territory." "What did she want?" Elena asked, though she was afraid she already knew. Dorothy's expression softened as she took in Elena's pale face. "Nothing worth repeating, dear. Just small-minded people making trouble where there isn't any." But Elena could see the worry in Dorothy's eyes, and it confirmed her worst fears. The gossip was spreading, becoming more vicious and specific. How long before someone confronted Jake directly with accusations about his bride-to-be? That afternoon, Jake arrived earlier than usual, his face grim. Elena knew immediately that he'd heard something unpleasant. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "Privately." They walked to the small garden behind the boarding house, where dried sunflower stalks rustled in the winter wind. Jake was quiet for several minutes, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. "Tom Abernathy cornered me at the bank today," he finally sighed. "Seems his wife has been spreading stories about you around town. According to her, you're a woman of questionable virtue who's trying to trap me into marriage." Elena's worst fears crystallized into horrible reality. What exactly is she saying? That you were pregnant when you arrived in Millbrook? That you seduced me to provide a father for your bastard child? Jake's voice was flat, controlled, but Elena could see the fury burning in his dark eyes. Elena sank onto a wooden bench, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "It's over, isn't it? Even if we marry now, everyone will believe her version of events." Jake sat beside her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "Elena, look at me. Do you think I care what people like the Abernathys think about us? You should care. They have influence in this town. They could make life very difficult for you. Let them try." Jake's voice was hard as steel. "Tom Abernathy needs my business more than I need his approval. Half the ranchers in the Territory Bank with him because I recommended his services. He won't risk alienating me over his wife's gossip." Elena wanted to believe him, but she'd seen how quickly public opinion could destroy someone's life. "Jake, maybe we should postpone the wedding. Give the talk time to die down." "Absolutely not." Jake's grip on her hands tightened. "That would just confirm their suspicions and give them more ammunition. We're getting married Sunday as planned, and anyone who doesn't like it can go to hell." Despite her fear, Elena felt a smile tug at her lips. "Language, Mr. Morrison. Wait until you hear what I plan to say if anyone dares insult my wife to my face." Jake's own smile was sharp and dangerous. "Now, is there anything else you need to tell me? Anything at all that these gossips might use against us?" Elena considered this carefully. "Nothing they could prove. My pregnancy is still barely noticeable, and only you know the truth about that. Everything else about Marcus, about why I came to Colorado, it's all things people might speculate about, but can't confirm." "Good. Then we proceed as planned." Jake stood and helped Elena to her feet. "I want you to hold your head high tomorrow and Sunday. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you cower." That evening, Elena was surprised by an unexpected show of support. Mrs. Peterson arrived at the boarding house carrying a covered basket, followed by several other women Elena recognized from church and around town. "We heard there's been some unpleasant talk," Mrs. Peterson announced without preamble. "And we wanted you to know that not everyone in Millbrook judges people based on gossip and speculation." The other woman nodded agreement. Elena recognized Mrs. Chun from next door, young Mrs. Foster who ran the seamstress shop, and Mrs. Rodriguez, whose husband worked at the livery stable. "Jake Morrison is a good man," Mrs. Chun added. "If he's chosen you, that's good enough for Wes." Mrs. Foster stepped forward shyly. "I brought you something for your wedding." She held out a delicate lace veil that had obviously been crafted with great skill and care. It was my grandmother's, and she always said it should go to a bride who needed blessing and protection. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she accepted the beautiful gift. Thank you. All of you. I don't know what to say. Say you'll be happy, Mrs. Peterson said firmly. And don't let the small-minded people in this town steal your joy. Lord knows there's little enough happiness in this world without letting petty gossips destroy it. The women stayed for tea and cake, filling the boarding house parlor with warm conversation and laughter. Elena felt some of her anxiety ease as she realized that while she might have enemies in Millbrook, she also had friendspeople who judged her by her character rather than by rumors and speculation. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, with brilliant sunshine sparkling off the snow-covered mountains. Elena woke up feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made it impossible to eat breakfast. In less than 24 hours, she would be Mrs. Jake Morrison. Dorothy spent the morning helping Elena with last-minute alterations to her wedding dress. The cream silk draped beautifully over Elena's changing figure, the empire waist cleverly disguising her condition while still looking fashionable. You look radiant, Dorothy said, stepping back to admire their work. Jake won't be able to take his eyes off you. Elena studied her reflection in the mirror. The young woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, confident, glowing, loved. It was hard to believe this was the same person who had stood abandoned on the train platform just a few months ago. That afternoon brought Jake's final bachelor visit to the boarding house. He found Elena in the kitchen, where she was nervously polishing silver that didn't need polishing. Having second thoughts? He asked, settling into his usual chair at the kitchen table. About marrying you? Never. Elena set down the silver and turned to face him. About everything else, the gossip, the looks, the way people will treat our children. Yes, I'm terrified. Jake studied her face carefully. Our children will be strong enough to handle whatever comes their way. And if anyone gives them trouble, they'll have to answer to me. What if people refuse to do business with you? What if the gossip damages your reputation permanently? Jake reached for her hands, drawing her closer to his chair. Elena, I built my ranch from nothing with these two hands and the sweat of my back. I earned every dollar in my bank account and every head of cattle on my property. If small-minded people want to judge me for marrying the woman I love, that says everything about them and nothing about me. Elena looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused from hard work, hers soft but growing stronger from months of labor at the boarding house. I love you, she said simply. I never thought I'd have the chance to say that to someone who meant it when they said it back. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. Jake brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Tomorrow, in front of God and everyone, I'm going to promise to love and protect you for the rest of my life. And I intend to keep that promise no matter what comes. That evening, Elena sat in her small room at the boarding house for the last time, packing her few belongings into the same carpet bag she'd carried from Pennsylvania. Tomorrow night, she would sleep in Jake's house as his wife, in the bed they would share as husband and wife. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She was still largely innocent about marital relations, and while Jake had been nothing but respectful during their courtship, tomorrow would change everything between them. She hoped she would prove adequate as a wife in all the ways that mattered. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting Dorothy with some last-minute wedding advice. Instead, Harold appeared in the doorway, looking unusually formal in his best suit. Elena, I wondered if I might have a word with you. Elena gestured for him to sit in the room's single chair while she perched on the edge of the bed. Harold seemed nervous, which was unlike his usual easy confidence. I wanted to speak with you. Before tomorrow, he began, his weathered hands clasped in his lap, about being a father to that baby you're carrying. Elena's breath caught. She'd never explicitly told Harold about her pregnancy, though she'd suspected he and Dorothy had figured it out. Dorothy and I, we never had children of our own, Harold continued. Wanted them something fierce, but the good Lord had other plans. So when you came to us, lost and scared and needing help, well, it felt like maybe we were meant to help raise you up, help you find your way. Elena felt tears threatening. You've been more like parents to me than anyone since my own folks died. That's what I wanted to talk about. Tomorrow, when Reverend Matthews asks who gives you away to be married, I'd be honored to stand up and speak for you, if you'll have me, that is. Elena's composure cracked completely. She flew across the small room and threw her arms around Harold's neck, sobbing with gratitude and overwhelming emotion. Yes, she managed through her tears. Yes, please. I'd be so grateful. Harold patted her back awkwardly, clearly moved himself. There now, girl. Don't go crying the night before your wedding. You'll have puffy eyes tomorrow, and Jake will think I upset you. Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. These are happy tears, the happiest tears I've ever cried. Good, because tomorrow's going to be a beautiful day, and you're going to be the most beautiful bride Millbrook's ever seen. And anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me and Dorothy. As Harold left her room, Elena felt a profound sense of completeness settle over her. Tomorrow she would marry Jake Morrison, surrounded by people who had chosen to love and support her, despite knowing her deepest secrets. She would begin her new life not as a woman fleeing shame and abandonment, but as someone cherished and protected by a community that had embraced her as family. The train station, where she'd been abandoned, seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 4 months. That frightened, desperate young woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more hopeful about the future. Elena placed her hands on her growing belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palms. Tomorrow her child would gain not just a father, but an entire extended family. Hayes, Mrs. Peterson, the other women who had offered their support, all of them would help raise and protect this child. We're going to be fine, she whispered to her unborn baby. Better than fine, we're going to be loved. Sunday morning dawned with crystalline clarity, the kind of high mountain day where the air itself seemed to sparkle. Elena woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep, and found Dorothy already bustling around the kitchen with unusual energy. Wedding day, Dorothy announced cheerfully, as if Elena might have forgotten. I've made your favorite breakfast blueberry pancakes and crisp bacon. You need to eat something substantial before the ceremony. Elena managed a few bites, though her stomach was too full of butterflies to accommodate much food. She kept glancing at the clock, counting the hours until she would walk down the aisle of Millbrook's small church to marry Jake Morrison. By mid-morning, the boarding house had transformed into a hive of activity. Mrs. Peterson arrived with a bouquet of winter roses she'd somehow coaxed to bloom in her greenhouse, their petals a perfect cream color that matched Elena's dress. Mrs. Foster brought her sewing basket to make any last-minute adjustments to the gown, while Mrs. Chun contributed a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to her own mother. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, Mrs. Peterson recited as they gathered in Elena's room to help her dress. The pearls are old, your dress is new, the roses are borrowed from my garden, and she produced a delicate blue ribbon from her pocket. This belonged to my daughter Sarah before the fever took her. I always hoped to see it worn at her wedding, but perhaps it can bring you luck instead. Elena felt tears threaten as Mrs. Peterson carefully wove the blue ribbon through her hair. The kindness of these women, most of whom had been strangers just months ago, overwhelmed her with gratitude. Dorothy stepped back to survey their handiwork. Absolutely perfect. Jake Morrison is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you. Elena studied her reflection in the small mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant young woman looking back at her. The cream silk dress fitted her perfectly, its empire waist both flattering and concealing. The lace veil fell in graceful folds around her shoulders, and the winter roses in her bouquet added the perfect touch of elegance. "I can't believe this is really happening," Elena whispered. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now you're about to marry the finest man in Colorado Territory," Mrs. Foster said firmly. "And don't let anyone tell you different." The church bells began to ring, calling the community to worship and witnessing Elena's wedding. Through her window, Elena could see people walking toward the white steepled building, including several faces she didn't recognize, ranch hands and neighboring families who had come specifically for the ceremony. Harold appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his best black suit with a white flower in his lapel. His eyes grew misty when he saw Elena fully dressed for her wedding. "My dear girl," he said softly, "you look absolutely beautiful. Are you ready?" Elena took a deep breath, feeling suddenly calm despite the magnitude of what was about to happen. "I'm ready." The walk to the church felt both eternal and instantaneous. Elena's arm was linked through Harold's, her bouquet trembling slightly in her free hand. Dorothy walked beside them, beaming with pride, while the other women formed a supportive procession behind them. Outside the church, Elena could see Jake's horse tied to the hitching post alongside several others. Her heart hammered as she realized that in just a few minutes, she would see him waiting for her at the altar. "Last chance to run," Harold whispered with a gentle smile. "Though you'd have to get past me first." Elena squeezed his arm. "I'm not running anywhere. I'm exactly where I belong." The church doors stood open, revealing a space filled with warm golden light and the soft murmur of assembled guests. Reverend Matthews stood at the altar in his ceremonial robes, his kind face welcoming. And there, standing beside him in a black suit Elena had never seen before, was Jake. He looked magnificent, his dark hair neatly combed, his strong shoulders filling out the formal jacket, his weathered hands steady at his sides. But it was his face that stole Elena's breath. When their eyes met across the length of the church, his expression transformed into something so tender and joyful that Elena felt her heart overflow. The small church was surprisingly full. Elena recognized many faces from town, but there were others she didn't know, ranch families who had traveled considerable distances to witness Jake Morrison's wedding. She also noticed, with a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension, that the Abernathys were present, sitting stiffly in one of the front pews with expressions of polite disapproval. As Elena began her walk down the aisle, she became aware of the reactions around her. She heard soft gasps of admiration at her appearance, saw smiles and nods of approval from friendly faces. But she also caught glimpses of calculating looks and whispered comments from those who had come to observe rather than celebrate. None of it mattered. Elena's entire focus was on Jake, who watched her approach with an expression of wonder that made her feel like the most beautiful woman who had ever lived. With each step, her nervousness faded, replaced by a growing sense of rightness and destiny. When they reached the altar, Harold turned to face Elena. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Reverend Matthews asked in his resonant voice. "Her loving family does," Harold replied firmly, his voice carrying clearly through the small church. He placed Elena's hand in Jake's, then stepped back with Dorothy to take their seats in the front pew. Jake's fingers closed around Elena's, warm and steady and reassuring. He leaned close enough to whisper, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Elena felt her cheeks warm as Reverend Matthews began the ceremony. The familiar words of the marriage service seemed to take on new meaning as she stood beside Jake, promising to love, honor, and cherish him for the rest of her life. When it came time for vows, Jake surprised her by speaking words he had clearly prepared himself. "Elena," he said, his voice strong and clear, "I promise to love you not just as my wife, but as my partner, my companion, and my dearest friend. I promise to protect you and provide for you, to stand by you in times of joy and sorrow, and to Build with you a home filled with love, laughter, and children." The word children seemed to echo through the church, and Elena saw several heads turn with interest. But Jake's dark eyes never left her face, and she drew strength from his unwavering gaze. "Jake," Elena replied, her own voice trembling with emotion, "I promise to love you with all my heart, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, and to create with you a life built on honesty, trust, and devotion. I promise to be your faithful wife in all circumstances, and to cherish the gift of your love for all the days of my life." Reverend Matthews smiled warmly as he prepared to pronounce them husband and wife. "By the authority vested in me by Colorado Territory and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake's kiss was gentle but thorough, a seal on the promises they had just made. When they broke apart, Elena saw tears in his dark eyes that matched her own. "Mrs. Morrison," he whispered, and Elena felt a thrill at hearing her new name. The congregation erupted in applause and congratulations as Jake and Elena turned to face their community as husband and wife. Elena caught sight of Dorothy wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, while Harold beamed with paternal pride. But as they began walking back down the aisle together, Elena also noticed the more critical faces in the crowd. Abernathy's expression was pinched with disapproval, and Elena caught fragments of whispered conversations that suggested not everyone was celebrating their union. Outside the church, they were immediately surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and gifts. Jake kept Elena close to his side, his arm around her waist in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Congratulations, Jake," called out a weathered man Elena didn't recognize. "About time you found yourself a wife. She's a beauty and no mistake." "Thank you, Charlie," Jake replied warmly. "Elena, this is Charlie Rodriguez. He runs cattle on the spread next to mine." Elena shook hands with Charlie and his wife Maria, who welcomed her warmly to the community. One by one, Jake introduced her to neighbors and friends, and Elena began to understand the scope of the life she was joining. These weren't just casual acquaintances, but people who would be part of her daily existence, fellow ranchers, their wives and children, the network of families who supported each other through the challenges of frontier life that Mrs. Peterson approached with tears in her eyes. "Oh, my dear, you looked absolutely radiant up there. And Jake, you handsome devil, you'd better take good care of our girl." "I intend to, Mrs. Peterson," Jake replied seriously. "For the rest of my life." As the crowd began to disperse, Dorothy approached with Harold close behind. "We've prepared a wedding feast back at the boarding house," she announced. "Nothing fancy, but enough to celebrate properly." Elena felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving the boarding house for the last time. It had been her sanctuary during the darkest period of her life, and the Hayes had become the family she'd lost when her parents died. "I don't know how to thank you," Elena said, hugging Dorothy tightly, "for everything you've done for me." "You don't need to thank us, honey. Just be happy. That's all we've ever wanted for you." The celebration at the boarding house was intimate and joyful. Dorothy had prepared a feast that would have been impressive for a restaurant, much less a small frontier boarding house. There was roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables preserved from the summer garden, and a beautiful cake decorated with sugared flowers. Elena sat beside Jake at the head table, feeling overwhelmed by the abundance of food and affection surrounding her. She watched Jake interact with their guests, noting how genuinely he seemed to care about each person present. This wasn't politeness or social obligation. Jake Morrison was a man who invested himself fully in his community. "Penny for your thoughts," Jake murmured, leaning close to her ear. "Just thinking about how different my life is from what I expected 6 months ago," Elena replied softly. "I thought I knew what my future held, but this is so much better than anything I could have imagined." Jake's hand found hers under the table. "The best is yet to come, Mrs. Morrison." As the afternoon wore on, Elena noticed that several guests had questions about her background and how she had come to Millbrook. She answered them as honestly as she could without revealing the more painful details of her abandonment and pregnancy. "I came west looking for a new start," she told Mrs. Chun when asked about her journey from Pennsylvania. "I lost my parents and needed to begin again somewhere fresh." "And how fortunate for all of us that you chose Millbrook," Mrs. Chun replied warmly. "Jake has been alone too long." But Elena also overheard less charitable conversations. She caught fragments of whispered speculations about the speed of their courtship, pointed comments about how quickly she had accepted Jake's proposal, and thinly veiled suggestions that perhaps there were reasons for such haste. Jake must have noticed her growing tension, because he suddenly stood and called for attention. "Friends," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room, "I want to thank you all for sharing this special day with Elena and me. Your presence here means more than you know. And I want to make something clear to everyone." The room fell silent, and Elena felt her heart begin to race. What was Jake planning to say? "I know there's been talk around town about my marriage," Jake continued, his tone pleasant, but with an underlying steel. "Some folks seem to think I've been hasty or foolish. Let me set the record straight." Elena held her breath, wondering if Jake was about to reveal her pregnancy to defend against the gossip. "I've loved Elena Winters from almost the moment I met her," Jake declared. "She's intelligent, kind, hardworking, and beautiful inside and out. Any man would be lucky to have her as his wife, and I consider myself the most fortunate man in Colorado Territory." He turned to look directly at Elena, his dark eyes blazing with sincerity. "I married her because I love her, because I want to spend my life with her, and because she makes me a better man than I ever thought I could be. And if anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to discuss it with me privately." The room erupted in applause, but Elena could see that Jake's words had hit their intended target. Mr. Abernathy looked distinctly uncomfortable, while his wife's face had turned an interesting shade of pink. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Elena felt a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. Soon, she and Jake would leave for his ranch for their home to begin their married life together. Mrs. Foster approached with a knowing smile. "I've packed a basket with some essentials for your first few days," she said quietly. "You'll have enough to worry about without wondering what to cook for supper." Elena thanked her gratefully, touched once again by the thoughtfulness of her new community. These women understood the challenges of frontier life and looked out for each other in practical, meaningful ways. As the last guests departed, Elena found herself alone with Jake for the first time since the ceremony. They stood in the boarding house parlor where they had shared so many evenings during their courtship, but everything felt different now. They were married, husband and wife. The reality of it was both thrilling and terrifying. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Morrison?" Jake asked softly. Elena looked around the familiar room one last time, then up at the man who was now her husband. "I'm ready." Jake had brought a buggy for the journey to his ranch, understanding that Elena's wedding dress wasn't suitable for horseback riding. As they drove through the snow-covered landscape toward the mountains, Elena felt like she was leaving one life behind and beginning another. "Nervous?" Jake asked, noting her quietness. "A little," Elena admitted. "About the ranch, about being a good wife, about everything really." Jake reached over to take her gloved hand. "We'll figure it out together. And Elena? You're already a good wife. The best wife I could have asked for." As they rounded a bend in the road, Elena saw Jake's ranch spread out below them in a sheltered valley. The house was exactly as he had described. A sturdy two-story structure with a wide front porch, surrounded by barns and outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney and light glowed in the windows, welcoming them home. "It's beautiful," Elena breathed, and meant it. This wasn't just a house, it was a homestead, a place where families were raised and dreams were built. "Our home," Jake said simply, "for as long as we both shall live." As they approached the house, Elena saw a figure emerge from the barn, a tall, thin man who raised his hand in greeting. Jake waved back enthusiastically. "That's Tom Bradley, my foreman," Jake explained. "He's been keeping things running while I was in town courting my bride." Elena smiled at the phrase, Jake's bride. Jake's wife, Mrs. Jake Morrison. No matter how many times she heard it, the reality still seemed too wonderful to believe. Tom approached the buggy with a wide grin. Well, Mrs. Morrison, I presume. Welcome home, ma'am. Jake's been talking about nothing but you for weeks." "Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I'm pleased to meet you." "Tom's been with me since I started the ranch," Jake explained as he helped Elena down from the buggy. "He's more like family than hired help." Tom Bradley tipped his hat respectfully. "I'll see to the horse and buggy, boss. You two get inside where it's warm. Maria left supper ready for you." Elena looked questioningly at Jake. "Maria? Tom's wife. She helps with the house and cooking, especially during busy seasons. You'll like her. She's got a heart as big as Texas and the best cooking skills this side of Denver." Inside, the house was everything Elena had hoped for and more. The front room was spacious and comfortable, with a stone fireplace crackling merrily and furniture that looked both sturdy and inviting. Everything was scrupulously clean and well-maintained, speaking to the care Jake had taken with his home. "Maria!" Jake called toward the back of the house. "We're home." A plump, cheerful woman appeared from what Elena assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on a clean apron. Her dark eyes sparkled with warmth as she took in Elena's wedding dress and radiant face. "Senora Morrison," Maria said, her English accented but clear. "Welcome to your home. Everything is ready for you." Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the simple words. Your home. After months of uncertainty and displacement, she finally had a home again. "Thank you, Maria. Everything looks wonderful. I made your favorite stew, center Jake, and fresh bread. And," Maria's eyes twinkled with mischief, "I put flowers in the bedroom. For romance, see?" Jake's cheeks reddened slightly, but he smiled warmly at the older woman. "Thank you, Maria. You think of everything." As Maria bustled back to the kitchen, Jake turned to Elena with an expression that was both tender and slightly nervous. "Would you like to see the rest of the house? Our bedroom?" Elena's heart fluttered at the words, "our bedroom," but she nodded. This was her wedding night, and despite her nervousness, she was eager to begin this new chapter of their life together. Jake led her up a sturdy staircase to the second floor, where several doors opened off a central hallway. He stopped at the largest door and turned to face her. "Elena," he said softly, "I want you to know that there's no pressure. We can take things as slowly as you need. This is your home now, and I want you to feel comfortable and safe here." Elena looked up into his dark eyes, seeing nothing but love and patience reflected there. This man had married her, knowing she carried another man's child, had defended her against gossip and judgment, had opened his home and heart to her without reservation. How could she not trust him completely? "I'm not afraid, Jake," she said softly. "I love you, and I want to be your wife in every way." Jake's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He opened the door and swept Elena into his arms, carrying her across the threshold into their bedroom, into their new life together as husband and wife. The room was beautiful, decorated with the flowers Maria had mentioned and lit by the warm glow of oil lamps. But Elena barely noticed the details. All her attention was focused on the man holding her, the man who had saved her from despair and given her a future filled with love and hope. As Jake set her gently on her feet and began to help her remove her wedding veil, Elena realized that her journey was complete. The frightened, abandoned young woman who had stood on the train platform 6 months ago was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more beloved. She was home, she was safe, she was loved. And tomorrow, she would begin the rest of her life as Mrs. Jake Morrison. Spring arrived early at the Morrison Ranch. painting the mountain meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with the sweet scent of new grass. Elena stood on the front porch, one hand resting on her now prominently rounded belly, watching Jake work with a spirited young stallion in the corral. At 7 months pregnant, she moved more slowly than before, but her heart had never felt lighter. The past 4 months of marriage had exceeded even her most optimistic dreams. Jake had proven to be not just a loving husband, but a true partner who consulted her on ranch decisions and valued her opinions. Their home had become a place of laughter and warmth, where neighbors dropped by for coffee and advice, and where Elena had discovered talents she never knew she possessed. "Signora Elena," Maria called from the kitchen doorway. "The bread is ready for the oven, and Signora Peterson is coming up the road." Elena turned to see the familiar figure of Mrs. Peterson driving her small buggy toward the house. The older woman had become one of Elena's closest friends, visiting regularly and offering invaluable advice about pregnancy and motherhood. "Mrs. Peterson," Elena greeted warmly as the older woman climbed down from her buggy. "What brings you out this way? Can't an old woman visit her favorite young couple without needing an excuse?" Mrs. Peterson replied with a grin, but her expression grew more serious as she studied Elena's face. "Though I'll admit I wanted to check on you. Word in town is that Dr. Harrison made a house call here yesterday." Elena's hand moved protectively to her belly. "Just a routine visit. The baby's been very active lately, and Jake insisted we have the doctor take a look." "And what did he say?" "That everything looks perfectly normal. The baby should arrive in about 2 months. Elena's smile was radiant. "Dr. Harrison said he's never seen a healthier expectant mother." Mrs. Peterson's relief was evident. "Good. We can't have anything happening to you or that baby. Jake would never forgive himself, and neither would the rest of us." As they settled on the porch with glasses of Maria's fresh lemonade, Elena reflected on how completely her life had changed. The woman who had once feared judgment and whispers now felt secure in her place within the community. The initial gossip about her hasty marriage had largely died down, replaced by genuine affection and respect for the young couple who had found love against all odds. "Speaking of the community," Mrs. Peterson said, as if reading Elena's thoughts, "there's been some interesting developments in town. The Abernathys are planning to move back east. Seems Tom's banking business isn't doing as well as expected." Elena tried to feel charitable about the news, but couldn't quite suppress a feeling of satisfaction. The Abernathys had made her early days in Millbrook unnecessarily difficult with their gossip and social pressure. "I hope they find happiness wherever they go," Elena said diplomatically. Mrs. Peterson's knowing look suggested she understood Elena's true feelings. "Very Christian of you, dear. More Christian than I feel, I'll admit. That woman caused a lot of unnecessary pain with her wagging tongue." Jake appeared around the corner of the house, leading the stallion he'd been training. His shirt was damp with sweat, and his dark hair clung to his forehead, but his smile was bright when he spotted their visitor, Mrs. Peterson. What a pleasant surprise! He tied the horse to the corral fence and approached the porch, removing his hat. "How are you doing?" "Better than I deserve, young man." "And you're looking well. Marriage agrees with you." Jake's eyes found Elena's, and the love in his gaze made her heart flutter just as it had on their wedding day. "Marriage to the right woman agrees with me," he corrected gently. As Mrs. Peterson prepared to leave, she pulled Elena aside with a conspiratorial air. "There's something else I wanted to tell you. Young Dr. Harrison was quite impressed with your knowledge of herbs and healing. He mentioned that the territory could use more women with medical training, especially for helping with births." Elena felt a spark of interest. During her pregnancy, she had discovered a fascination with medical matters, asking Dr. Harrison countless questions during his visits and studying every book on health and healing she could find. "What exactly did he say?" "That if you were interested, he'd be willing to teach you more formal midwifery skills." There's a great need for skilled birth attendants in these parts, and you have natural instincts for it. The idea both excited and intimidated Elena. She had always enjoyed helping people, and the thought of assisting other women through childbirth appealed to her. But could she handle such responsibility? That evening, as Elena and Jake sat by the fireplace after supper, she shared Mrs. Peterson's conversation with him. Jake listened thoughtfully, his expression growing more interested as she spoke. "What do you think?" Elena asked when she'd finished. "Would it be too much with the baby coming and everything?" Jake reached for her hands, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I think you'd be wonderful at it. You have a natural gift for caring for people, and you're one of the calmest, most level-headed women I know. But the decision has to be yours. It would mean being away from home sometimes, riding out to assist with births at all hours. We'll manage. Tom and Maria can help with the baby when needed, and I support whatever makes you happy." Jake's smile was encouraging. "Besides, I married a woman who was brave enough to travel 800 miles to start a new life. I think she can handle helping bring babies into the world." Elena felt a surge of love for this man who believed in her capabilities even when she doubted them herself. "I'd like to try. After our baby is born and I've recovered, I'd like to learn from Dr. Harrison." Jake leaned over to kiss her forehead. "Then that's what we'll do." 3 weeks later, Elena woke in the pre-dawn darkness with a sharp pain across her lower back. She lay still for a moment, hoping it was just the normal discomfort of late pregnancy. But when another pain followed 15 minutes later, she knew her time had come. "Jake," she whispered, gently shaking her husband's shoulder. "Jake, wake up." He was instantly alert, as he always was when needed. "What is it? Are you all right? I think the baby's coming." "The pain started about an hour ago." Jake was out of bed and pulling on his clothes before Elena had finished speaking. "I'll ride for Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Peterson. Will you be all right until I get back?" Elena nodded, though another contraction was building. "Maria's here, and the pains are still far apart. But hurry." Jake kissed her quickly and disappeared into the hallway. Elena heard him pounding on Tom and Maria's door, explaining the situation in urgent whispers. Within minutes, she heard hoofbeats as Jake rode hard toward town. Maria appeared in the bedroom doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. "Come, Signora Elena, we get you ready for your baby." The next few hours passed in a blur of increasing pain and anticipation. Maria proved to be an experienced birth attendant, helping Elena through each contraction with soothing words and practical assistance. Mrs. Peterson arrived first, bustling into the bedroom with her sleeves already rolled up in a bag of supplies. "How are we doing, dear?" she asked, immediately taking charge of the situation. "The pains are getting stronger," Elena managed between contractions, "and closer together." Dr. Harrison arrived just as Elena was beginning to feel the overwhelming urge to push. The kind-faced physician examined her quickly and pronounced everything to be progressing normally. "First babies often take their time," he said reassuringly, "but this little one seems eager to meet the world." Jake hovered anxiously in the hallway, forbidden from the birthing room, but refusing to go far from Elena's side. Every time she cried out with pain, Elena heard his footsteps pacing the wooden floor outside their bedroom door. "Let me see him," Elena called out during a brief respite between contractions. "Please." Mrs. Peterson opened the door to allow Jake to peek inside. His face was pale with worry, but his eyes were full of love and encouragement. "You're doing beautifully," he said softly. "I'm so proud of you." Elena managed to smile despite the pain. "Soon we'll meet our baby." "Soon," Jake agreed, though Elena could see the worry lines around his eyes. Losing his first wife in childbirth had left deep scars, and she knew he was reliving those terrible memories. As the morning sun climbed higher, Elena's labor intensified. Dr. Harrison remained calm and encouraging, but Elena could see him watching her carefully for any signs of distress. Mrs. Peterson held her hand through each contraction, offering the comfort of experience and maternal wisdom. "I can see the head," Dr. Harrison announced suddenly. "One more good push, Elena." With a final tremendous effort, Elena brought her child into the world. The baby's first cry filled the room, strong and healthy and unmistakably alive. "It's a girl," Dr. Harrison announced, holding up the tiny, squirming infant, a beautiful, perfect little girl. Elena sobbed with relief and joy as Mrs. Peterson cleaned the baby and placed her in Elena's arms. The infant was indeed perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a face that was already showing hints of Jake's strong features, mixed with Elena's delicate bone structure. "She's beautiful," Elena whispered, studying her daughter's face through tears of wonder. "Absolutely beautiful." Dr. Harrison finished his examination and pronounced both mother and baby to be in excellent health. "You did wonderfully, Elena. This little lady couldn't have asked for a better start in life." Mrs. Peterson opened the door to admit Jake, who approached the bed with wonder and reverence written across his face. When he saw Elena holding their daughter, his eyes filled with tears. "Is she ... Are you both?" "We're perfect," Elena assured him. "Come meet your daughter." Jake sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his large, calloused hands trembling as Elena placed the baby in his arms. The contrast between his weathered rancher's hands and the tiny, delicate infant was deeply moving. "Hello, little one," Jake whispered to his daughter. "Welcome to the world. I'm your daddy, and I'm going to love you and protect you for the rest of my life." The baby opened her eyes at the sound of his voice, seeming to focus on his face with the intent concentration of the very young. Jake's smile was radiant as he looked from his daughter to his wife. "Thank you," he said softly to Elena, "for this gift, for our family, for everything." Elena reached up to touch his face, her own heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "Thank you for giving us both a home and a future." Mrs. Peterson wiped her eyes with her apron. "Well, I think this calls for a celebration. Maria's been cooking all morning, and half the county will want to welcome this baby." Over the following days, a steady stream of visitors arrived at the Morrison Ranch to meet the newest member of the community. Dorothy and Harold made the journey from town, bringing gifts and tears of joy. Tom Bradley carved a beautiful wooden cradle, while his wife Maria sewed dozens of tiny clothes for the growing baby. Elena marveled at how naturally motherhood came to her. The baby, whom they named Sarah after Mrs. Peterson's late daughter, was an easy child who slept well and nursed eagerly. Jake proved to be a devoted father, taking turns with nighttime feedings and spending hours simply holding his daughter and talking to her about the ranch and the mountains. "She's going to be spoiled rotten," Elena observed one evening, watching Jake rock Sarah by the fireplace while singing a gentle lullaby in his deep, rumbling voice. "Good," Jake replied without taking his eyes off his daughter. "She deserves to be spoiled. She's the most perfect baby who ever lived." Elena laughed, knowing that every parent felt the same way about their child. But looking at Jake's face as he held Sarah, she felt a profound sense of completeness. This was what family looked like, not just blood relations, but people who chose to love and care for each other through all of life's challenges. When Sarah was 6 weeks old, Dr. Harrison returned to check on both mother and baby. He pronounced them both thriving and then broached the subject Mrs. Peterson had mentioned months earlier. "Elena, I've been thinking about our previous conversation regarding midwifery training. Are you still interested?" Elena looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, I think I am. But how would it work with Sarah? We'll start slowly. I have several expectant mothers in the area who would benefit from prenatal visits. You could accompany me on those calls, learning while helping. When the time comes for actual births, We'll see how you feel about leaving Sarah for short periods." Elena felt excitement building in her chest. The idea of helping other women through the miracle of childbirth appealed to her deeply, especially after experiencing it herself. "I'd love to learn from you, Dr. Harrison." "Excellent. We'll begin next week with Mrs. Jameson. She's expecting her 5th child and would appreciate having another woman present during her checkups." As summer deepened into fall, Elena began her informal medical training while caring for Sarah and managing the household. She discovered that she had a natural aptitude for the work, quickly learning to recognize signs of potential complications and to provide comfort and reassurance to nervous mothers. Her first solo birth assistance came in late October, when young Mrs. Foster went into labor unexpectedly while Dr. Harrison was attending to a broken leg 20 miles away. Elena rode out in the middle of the night, leaving Sarah in Maria's capable care, and successfully helped deliver a healthy baby boy. "You saved my life," Mrs. Foster said tearfully as Elena cleaned up after the birth. "I was so scared, and you made everything seem possible." Elena felt a deep satisfaction in those words. This was her calling. She realized helping women through one of life's most challenging and beautiful experiences. By Christmas, Elena had assisted with 6 births and earned a reputation as one of the most skilled midwives in the territory. Women began requesting her specifically, and Dr. Harrison spoke of her with growing respect and admiration. "You have a gift," he told her one snowy December evening after they had successfully delivered twins to a rancher's wife. "I've trained several assistants over the years, but none with your natural instincts and calm demeanor." Elena felt proud of the praise, but her greatest satisfaction came from the growing number of healthy babies and grateful mothers she had helped. Each successful birth felt like a small miracle, a reminder of the preciousness of life and the strength of women. On New Year's Eve, as 1875 dawned cold and clear over the Colorado mountains, Elena sat in her rocking chair nursing Sarah while Jake added logs to the fireplace. The house was quiet except for the baby's soft nursing sounds and the crackling of the fire. "Happy?" Jake asked, settling into his own chair beside hers. Elena looked around their cozy parlor, at the man who had given her love and security, at the healthy baby in her arms, and at the life they had built together. 1 year ago, she had been a desperate, abandoned woman with no future and no hope. Now she was a beloved wife, devoted mother, and respected member of her community. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she said softly. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life." Jake reached over to stroke Sarah's downy head, his touch gentle and reverent. "Believe it, you've earned every bit of happiness you have." Elena thought back to that terrible day at the train station, when Marcus's letter had shattered her dreams and left her stranded in a strange place with nothing but $15 and a broken heart. That woman seemed like a different person now, someone she remembered with compassion but could barely recognize. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Marcus hadn't abandoned me?" she asked. "If I'd married him as planned?" Jake considered this seriously. "I think you would have been miserable. A man who could abandon someone the way he abandoned. He wasn't capable of real love. You deserve so much better than that." Elena nodded, knowing he was right. Marcus's betrayal, as painful as it had been, had ultimately led her to Jake and to the life she was meant to live. Sometimes the most devastating losses open doors to unexpected blessings. "I'm grateful he left me," she said quietly. "I'm grateful for everything that brought me here, to you, to this life we've built." Jake smiled and leaned over to kiss her forehead. "I'm grateful too, for all of it. For the courage you showed in starting over, for the love you've given me. For our daughter, for the woman you've become." Outside, snow began to fall softly, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Elena watched the flakes drift past the window and thought about the future, about the children she and Jake might have together, about the women she would help bring their own children safely into the world, about the community they would continue to build and nurture. Sarah finished nursing and settled into sleep, her tiny face peaceful and content. Elena adjusted her in her arms and smiled at Jake, who was watching them both with an expression of absolute devotion. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just counting my blessings," Jake replied. "My beautiful wife, my perfect daughter. Our home, our future. Everything I never dared to hope for." Elena felt tears of happiness prick her eyes. This was what love looked like, not the desperate passion of her youth, or the false promises of men like Marcus, but the steady, enduring commitment of two people who had chosen to build a life together based on trust, respect, and genuine affection. As the clock on the mantel chimed midnight, welcoming the new year, Elena Morrison sat in her warm home surrounded by love and reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here. She had been abandoned at a train station, pregnant and alone, with nothing but hope to sustain her. Now she had everything: a devoted husband, a beautiful daughter, meaningful work, and a community that valued and respected her. She had not just survived her abandonment. She had transformed it into the foundation of a life more wonderful than any she could have imagined. The woman who had once feared she would never be worthy of love had become someone deeply beloved. The girl who had once thought her life was over had discovered it was just beginning. Elena Morrison closed her eyes and smiled, holding her sleeping daughter close while her husband kept watch over them both. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight, she was simply grateful to be exactly where she belonged: home, safe and surrounded by love that would last a lifetime. 5 years later, Elena Morrison stood on the very platform where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. But this time, she wasn't alone. Jake held their 3-year-old son Benjamin's hand while Sarah, now a spirited 5-year-old, pressed her nose against the train window, watching for their expected guests. The Denver and Rio Grande locomotive pulled into Millbrook Station with the same thunderous roar Elena remembered from that devastating October day. But instead of fear and abandonment, this arrival brought anticipation and joy. "Mama, I see them!" Sarah squealed as the train doors opened. Dorothy and Harold Hayes emerged from the passenger car, older now but beaming with excitement. Behind them came Dr. Harrison's replacement, a young physician named Dr. Catherine Wells, the first female doctor many in Millbrook had ever seen. Elena had invited Dr. Wells to establish a practice in their growing community, recognizing that the territory desperately needed more medical professionals. After 5 years of working as a midwife, Elena had delivered over 60 babies and earned respect throughout Colorado Territory. Several medical schools back east had even written requesting her observations on frontier childbirth practices. "Elena," Dorothy embraced her warmly, "you look wonderful. Motherhood and medicine certainly agree with you." Harold swept Sarah into his arms while Jake shook hands with Dr. Wells. "Welcome to Millbrook, Doctor. We're honored to have you here." "The honor is mine," Dr. Wells replied, her eyes bright with determination. "Mrs. Morrison's letters about the medical needs here convinced me this is exactly where I belong." As they walked toward town, Elena reflected on the remarkable changes 5 years had brought. Millbrook had grown from a small frontier settlement into a thriving community. The boarding house now occupied an entire block, Harold and Dorothy having expanded to accommodate the increasing number of travelers and new residents. The Morrison Ranch had prospered too. Jake's cattle operation had become one of the largest in the territory, and their horse breeding program supplied mounts to ranchers across 3 states. But their greatest pride remained their family and Elena's medical work. "Tell me about this new hospital proposal," Dr. Wells said as they reached the renovated boarding house. Elena's eyes lit up. "The territorial government has approved funding for a small hospital here in Millbrook. Nothing elaborate, just 6 beds and proper surgical facilities. They want me to serve as head nurse and midwife supervisor. And Jake supports this? Elena glanced at her husband, who was patiently answering Benjamin's endless questions about trains. He insists on it. Says the territory needs more women in positions of medical authority. That evening, the entire community gathered at the church for a welcome celebration honoring Dr. Wells. Elena watched Jake interact with their children and neighbors, still marveling at the depth of his kindness and the steadiness of his love. Mrs. Peterson, now 80 but still sharp as ever, pulled Elena aside. "You know, dear, I was thinking about that first day you arrived, standing on that platform looking lost and scared. Did you ever imagine your life would become this?" Elena followed Mrs. Peterson's gesture toward the crowded room, Jake teaching Benjamin to shake hands properly, Sarah showing off her reading skills to anyone who would listen, friends and neighbors celebrating together in the glow of oil lamps. "And genuine affection. Never," Elena said softly. "I thought my story was ending that day. I had no idea it was just beginning." "That's the thing about life," Mrs. Peterson observed. "Sometimes our worst moments become the doorways to our best ones." Later, as the family walked home under a canopy of stars, Elena carried sleeping Benjamin, while Jake held Sarah's hand and pointed out constellations. The ranch house glowed warmly in the distance, with Maria's lights still burning in the kitchen window. "Mama," Sarah said suddenly, "tell me again about the train station." It had become Sarah's favorite bedtime story, the tale of how Mama had come to Colorado on a train and met Papa, how they fell in love and built their family together. Elena had simplified it considerably for young ears, but the essence remained. "True. Well," Elena began, "once upon a time, a young woman took a very long train ride to find her new life." As she told the familiar story, Elena realized that Sarah would grow up never knowing what it felt like to be unwanted or abandoned. Her children would know only love, security, and the certainty that they belonged somewhere. That knowledge filled Elena with profound satisfaction. At home, after the children were tucked into bed, Elena and Jake sat on their front porch swing, wrapped in quilts against the cool mountain air. The ranch spread out below them in the moonlight, their cattle dotting the meadows, their horses peaceful in the corrals, their home solid and welcoming behind them. "Any regrets?" Jake asked quietly, his arm tightening around her shoulders. Elena considered the question seriously. Did she regret the pain of Marcus's betrayal? The fear and uncertainty of those early days? The gossip and judgment she'd faced? "None," she said finally. "Every difficult moment led me here, to you, to our children, to this life. I wouldn't change a single thing." Jake kissed the top of her head. "Not even Marcus abandoning you, especially not that." Elena smiled in the darkness. "The best thing Marcus Bellwood ever did for me was get on that train and leave. If he hadn't, I might never have discovered who I really was or what I was capable of becoming." A shooting star streaked across the Colorado sky, brilliant and brief against the vast darkness. Elena made a wish not for herself, but for all the women who might find themselves abandoned and afraid, hoping they too would discover that endings could become beginnings, that love could emerge from loss, and that the worst day of their lives might just lead to the best. The woman who had once stood terrified on a train platform, clutching $15 and a broken heart, was gone. In her place sat Elena Morrison, beloved wife, devoted mother, respected healer, and pillar of her community. She had not just survived her abandonment. She had transformed it into the foundation of a life filled with purpose, love, and unshakable happiness. As she and Jake rose to go inside their warm home, Elena took one last look at the stars above the Colorado mountains. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, and new opportunities to help others. But tonight, she was simply grateful to be exactly where she belonged, surrounded by love that had grown from the ashes of despair into something beautiful, lasting, and unbreakably strong. The train station where her old life ended had become the starting point of everything wonderful in her world. And Elena Morrison wouldn't have it any other way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.